Good morning, everybody. If people could take their seats so we could get started here. I'd like to welcome everybody to the American Eel Management Board meeting today. My name is Tom O'Connell. For those of you that don't know me, from Maryland. I'll be chairing. This is my first meeting that I'll be chairing on the American Eel, thanks to Terry for the last couple of years of his work. Before we get started, I'm going to hand it over to Bob Beal, our Executive Director, to just introduce a few new commissioners today. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is our first coastwide board of the week, obviously, and just want to introduce a few new faces that are around the table and around the room, just so folks can introduce themselves and then get to know each other and know who's sitting at the table representing which states. As Terry Stockwell mentioned earlier, Emerson Hasbrook from New York is here. He's the new governor's appointee from New York. But as you notice, Pat Augustine, who is not a new commissioner, but is still here, and Pat's serving as the proxy for Senator Boyle, the legislative commissioner from New York. Another relatively new face is Chris Zeman from New Jersey. Chris Zeman serving as Tom Fode's proxy for this meeting, and Russ Allen, everybody knows Russ. Tom Baum was also at the board this morning. I think some folks, I don't know if Tom's still in the room or not. Yep, there he's in the back. Tom from New Jersey. Tom's been in the commission process a long time, but relatively new to the boards. John Bull is the new commissioner of the Virginia Marine Resources Commission. John is in the back. As he likes to say, he's trying to fill the shoes of Jack Travelstead. So introduce yourself to John, and he'll be here for a while. I think Rob's down there at the table for John right now. And the last introduction is Sherry White from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Sherry's the new Region 5 Assistant Regional Director. Thank you, Sherry. And so that's it, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody that's new here today. So everybody should have an agenda in front of you, and as you'll see, we have a few updates, but the primary focus of today's meeting is to review draft addendum 4 for public comment to go out for public hearing this summer. The first two items on the agenda and last meeting's proceedings. Is there any comments or questions regarding the agenda for today? Seeing none, the agenda will stand approved. In regards to the proceedings from our February 2014 meeting, are there any questions or comments regarding those proceedings? We've got one person from the public. Is it in regards to the February 2014 proceedings? Sir? Yes. All right, come up to the microphone, please. If you could state your name for the record.
My name is Daniel Hightower. I'm a South Carolina eel fisherman. And I'd just like to address a few of the things that the implications of addendum 3.
Hold on one second. We're not yet at the public comment period. So.
Oh, okay.
All right, we're almost there. Just hang on for a second. You can take a seat there if you want. Back to the February 2014 proceedings. Any comments or concerns on those? Seeing none, those proceedings will stand approved. Now we're at the public comment period. We do have two members from the public that signed up. Daniel Hightower, would you come up and just state your name for the record again? And these are for items that are not on the agenda.
Absolutely. My name is Daniel Hightower. I'm a South Carolina eel fisherman. I'd like to address some of the issues of addendum 3 and the implications to the South Carolina fishermen as it pertains. This year, as a fisherman, I can speak on the numbers that I've caught and what I did. This year I caught a little over $300,000 worth of eels at market price, and out of that I was able to keep less than 2% because of the 1/8-inch mesh regulations. Now my questions would be, the 1/8-inch mesh as it pertains, Maine and South Carolina are two completely different fisheries. Maine majority having a glass eel catch and a very low pigmented eel catch. South Carolina being the opposite, I catch 1,000 pounds of pigmented eels in 3 months to 10 pounds of glass eels in the river that we're regulated to at this time. Now, if sorry, give me a second. If the 1/8-inch mesh regulation is used for two completely different states, I don't see how that can be effective. And also by reducing our catch by 98%, how is that justified by the board? That's one of my first questions. And the second question is how is in Addendum 3 is the pigmented eel fishery represented as a new and developing fishery when I'm holding my hand October 1974 issue of Trends magazine, where Randall Livingston was catching and raising these pigmented eels in his farm, which I've given a couple of copies of these out. I can pass it around if need be. But those are a couple of the issues that I would like to address, and I don't know if y'all have any comment or answers for those.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate those comments. As we probably go through the meeting today, if the board members has questions, if you're hanging around, maybe we can bring it back up.
Absolutely. And one more thing, maybe there could be an amendment to represent the states for that 1/8-inch mesh, because as it pertains to elvers, when you use an 1/8-inch mesh, we have an elver fike net permit. That's anything under 6 inches as defined. But the 1/8-inch mesh regulates those 6-inch elvers out of the catch, which, inherently, as you can see, South Carolina is predominantly that's our catch, and that's why I'm here today, just to represent South Carolina fishermen and talk with you fine people.
Oh, thanks a lot. Appreciate you taking the time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Jeffrey Pierce, if you come up and introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner and Mr. Chair and people from the American Eel Board. Got a couple things. Reading the new draft addendum 4, there's a few things that are incorrect on the executive summary. The first paragraph, you have a combination of historic overfishing. Overfishing has not been determined in this fishery. And then on page 1, in background, it states overfishing again. Overfishing has not been determined.
Excuse me for 1 second, sir. This public comment period is for items that are not on the agenda, and draft addendum 4 is. So there will be an opportunity for public input on that. So do you have anything to say that's not on the agenda right at this point in time?
I only have something that should be in this draft addendum. Overboard, outboard migration, and turbine mortality. It says in this addendum that it cannot be easily corrected. That's not true. Through FERC L3, Article 15 and 16, with cooperation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NOAA, and NIMS, they could encourage the hydroelectric facilities to do this.
All right. Kate Taylor is saying that we already have the authority in Addendum 2 and 3 to address those concerns. I'll talk to Kate maybe at a break to see if we need to bring those up today or not.
Well, it says in this addendum that this cannot be corrected, so it's inconsistent with Addendum 3 is what I'm trying to point out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take a closer look at that. Any other members from the public that didn't sign up that wanted to say a word? All right, seeing none, we'll move forward with the agenda. We have an update on the 2014 Maine Elver Fishery Management Measures. Terry Stockwell.
Pat Keller is going to do it.
Okay, go ahead, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can, Kate, go right to the next slide if you would. I'm just going to quickly do an update here. I think I've got 8 or 9 slides for the board. Talk about the quota system that we put in place, and that was an individual, allocated to individuals. The swipe card system, enforcement and monitoring, penalty provisions in the season to date. So we had 2 pieces of legislation that went through this year and were signed into law by the governor to ensure that we had everything in place for this season that is currently ongoing. LD 1625 authorized the commissioner to establish a rule to create an individual elver fishing quota for the state. If you recall, we voluntarily put a 35% reduction in place that brought our total target down to 11,749 pounds for this season. It also allocates quota to the non-tribal license holders using a formula that takes into account prior year's landing. The formula that we used was taking the last 3 years. We averaged the best 2 years of the landings from an individual. And then, because by doing that, that little bit of a math problem, what you ended up with more, a higher number, if you will, for the individual based on what they would have had or what would have shown for the 11,000. If we total them all up, it would have been greater than 11,000. So at the end of that calculation with the 2-year average, throwing out their worst year, we then had to take an additional 41.8% from each individual. Then a specific percentage of the overall quota is then allocated to each of the 4 federally recognized tribes. And out of that 11,000, approximately 2,581 were allocated to the tribes, or 21.9% of the fishery. Next slide, please. There we go. So just quickly, this just shows the quota that we have in place. You'll see for the Passamaquoddies, Penobscots, Maliseets, and Micmacs, and then at the bottom the non-tribal. The first column shows the total quota for each of the jurisdictions. We subtracted a 5% buffer from that, and then they show the far right column shows the allocated pounds. Again, totaling up the total poundage that would be allocated to each jurisdiction. Next slide. The one component that is new for this fishery, which is new to the state, is the swipe card system, and we were I'd call it cautiously optimistic going into this season that this would work as well as we had hoped, and it far exceeded our expectations. The way that we implemented this system is we had all license holders, tribal and non-tribal, those 949 individuals, were required to appear in person to pick up their transaction cards. Marine Patrol officer went over all of the laws associated with that transaction card and their individual quotas, and then everyone who received that card was then required to sign off, and that signature was witnessed by a Marine Patrol officer. So if somebody came up to us, which we've had a few people say that they didn't know that was the law, we have them on record with a signature stating that they in fact signed off on this and were aware of the laws. All license holders were given a summary of the law and the regulations pertaining to the elder fishery, and then the license holders were given a sheet that explained the use of their transaction card. The transaction card looks like a simple credit card. That credit card, those or the hotel cards that you would have here, we were concerned that just abuse coming in and out of a wallet or however they were going to hold them, that they would potentially start to fail. But to date, we've only had one card fail, and only one swipe card reader fail. But that swipe card reader, we think there may have been some thinking to try to get around how they were going to move forward, but it was not finally determined. We replaced the mechanics or the reader, and everything now is moving forward smoothly. Next slide. The other piece of legislation was LD 1723. This was more focused on enforcement and monitoring. With harvesters, we established the requirements for the use of the swipe card when selling elvers. Requires the harvester to have in their possession, when they're fishing, their license, a transaction card, and a photo ID. If they don't have, if they're missing one of those three, then they cannot move forward with the transaction. The transaction card is deactivated by us when the quota is reached, and I think today, as of today, we've shut off around 60 cards for reaching their quota. We did reinstitute the 48-hour closed periods from noon Friday to noon Sunday. We also, at request of the Passamaquoddies, put in a dip net only restriction for the St. Croix River, which is the border river between Maine and Canada. And the season start was delayed until April 6th. It normally starts on March 22nd, and the reason it was delayed is that the legislature took a little additional time, and there was some back and forth right at the end, which meant that we could not get it finalized and then to the governor for signature in time. So, next slide. As far as the dealers, with enforcement and monitoring, we created requirements for dealers to use the DMR-issued reporting equipment, which is a swipe card reader. DMR then provided the reporting software, and again, it's been working flawlessly. The dealers must sync with DMR licensing system once every 24 hours in order to ensure that they don't buy from harvesters whose cards have been deactivated. The dealer must upload landings every 24 hours, as I said, by 2 p.m. And then the following morning, by 7:30 or 8 o'clock the following morning, we'll have a full report sent out to both Colonel Feasanton, myself, and others within the landings program and within patrol. The dealers may immediately be suspended for failure to report, and swipe card readers may be seized by patrol. So if we have an issue, all of these swipe card readers are state-owned, so if we have abuse of the system, we can put them out of business right then and there on the spot by just taking their equipment. The supplemental buyers must keep a running tally of purchases. If Elvers are in possession and don't match the records, the entire bulk pile may be seized. So if we have a patrol officer who stops the truck and they say they've got 20 pounds on board, and the officer looks and he thinks they have 25 pounds on board or 30 pounds on board, he can require them to immediately drive back to their fixed place of doing business and weigh the eels. If it's a minor violation, they're only a few pounds over, then we will seize just the poundage, a small amount of the poundage. But if it is a violation of 10 pounds or more, we will seize the entire bulk pile and libel that. We'll hold on to the money. We'll go through the court proceeding, and then if we're deemed to be wrong, then they would receive part of those funds back. All purchases must be made by check, so we went back to the no cash sales. Elvers must be returned to the permanent facility for at least 60 minutes before shipping out of state, so all of those supplemental buyers who buy for the dealer with the fixed facility must come back to that location. The one area that we looked like we made a mistake on was the fact that if a dealer did not buy, and they didn't have to sync. So what was happening is we were turning off cards, and somebody would still fish, and then they would go to a dealer that hadn't synced up for 2 or 3 days, and they were able to then go ahead and sell those eels. And so in some cases, they were going over their quota. So to rectify that situation, I signed an emergency rule and put that in place last week. And so even if they have not purchased any eels, they have to sync at 0 pounds. Next. The penalty provisions, as I reported to this board in the past, all of our penalties for the Elver fishery are felonies now. They are a Class D crime with a $2,000 fine. The first offense is a mandatory 1-year suspension of license, and the second offense is your license is permanently revoked. Those two issues, the second offense, the 2 strikes and you're out, has brought us into a very high level of compliance with licensed fishermen. The harvester who sells more than their quota must pay restitution to the state equal to the value of their overages. Joe, what do we have? 4 people, I think, now who have gone over to date, 4 or 5 that have gone over for a total of about 15 pounds. We deal with that through an administrative process, and so they are they are notified by Marine Patrol officers that they've gone over their quota, so they've been summoned. They know that they will lose their license for the following year, and then we take them through an administrative process. We know what they paid before, or purchased the eels, or sold the eels for, not purchased them for. And they are then made aware of the fact that they have to refund that money to the state of Maine, and that money would go directly into our eel and Elver management fund. I think there was one piece left, unless I cover it. So The last bullet, collective overage by non-tribal license holders or by any of the 4 federally recognized tribes is deduced from the following year's allocation. So that was the point that I brought up at the last board meeting. Next slide, please. And just a quick update on the season. Despite the delayed start and an incredibly brutal winter, it was even brutal for me, and I like winter. We've caught greater than 50% of the quota. If you broke it out, the non-tribal license holders have caught 57% of their quota to date. As I said, the swipe card is performing excellent. Enforcement actions to date. Before the season even started, we implemented the actions against 14 harvesters for reporting violations for the last 3 years for improper reporting. The in-state poaching has been very limited, and compliance is very, very high by license holders, but there's very little illegal activity. Usually we see a lot of cases of poaching at fishways and other places, and that has been very minimal this year. We have 65 individuals who have reached their individual fishing quota and their cards have been deactivated, and 4 individuals have gone over their quota for 16 pounds. The big case that we had, the real big case that we had in Maine is the fact that our Maine Revenue Service is looking at harvesters for not paying taxes. The first one who went through, he underreported his income by $700,000. He's now in the process of paying that money back in full and will be spending 9 months in jail. And the IRS hasn't taken care of him yet either, so that's just his first stop in the court system. And there are many more individuals who will be going through that process. I think we've also had 3, Joe, or 4 cases of illegal eels that have been brought in, that we know that have been brought in from out of state, and they tried to sell to dealers, and we were able to, Marine Patrol was able to make some really good cases, and I think we've, was it 50 or 60 pounds were confiscated and then libeled through those cases, but very, very little activity compared to last year on eels coming in from out of state, and I think that is a direct result of the individual fishing quota and the swipe cards that we put in place. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that'll end my remarks.
Great overview. Thanks, Pat. Any questions for Pat? Dan?
Thank you, Pat. It's a great report. I have a few questions, but I'll start with the first one. Can you describe for us the typical transactions of eels and relative to primary buyers and secondary buyers and tertiary buyers? So to maybe get to the point, are your primary buyers also the folks who are shipping out of the airports, or do you have multiple persons who take possession?
So we have a primary dealer or buyer who has a fixed facility, and then under that dealer license, he may have supplemental licenses, and those would be the people that he hires with trucks to go out and buy on the rivers. So those individuals are buying. They also buy directly at their fixed facility, but all the eels have to come back to that fixed facility. The shipping of eels out of state, some of our dealers, what they'll do is just turn around and sell their eels that they buy directly to another dealer for a profit and not deal with the export side of the business. I would look to the Colonel to remind me. We probably have 6 to 10 dealers who probably do export. There may be a little bit more, Dan, but that's what's ringing a bell right now.
Yes, Sarah, and then Doug.
Thank you. A question on the enforcement side, and thank you for your efforts to address cutting back on poachers in other states coming to Maine to sell their eels. I'm just curious if, as the system has worked, if the swipe card is more to get at quota, and if there's traceability as to the source and origin of those eels. And interestingly, as I was reading the Cape Cod Times, our daily paper in Barnstable County and for the Cape and Islands, in today's paper, there was a poaching effort that was thwarted, saving, according to the press, about 35 pounds of young and valuable eels. They had condensed them in a fishway, and it was just because a passerby asked these 2 guys, "What are you doing?" And they ran off. So here was 35 pounds of Elvers. What are we doing to stop that from traveling north and over the border and finding its way to a dealer and being shipped out?
So I think that's a great question, and I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the individual fishing quota that we have in place now. An individual may have as low as 3 pounds or as high as 100 pounds, depending on how good they have been within the fishery, within the history that they have in the fishery. An individual, whether he has 3 pounds or 100 pounds, is very unlikely to want to take on illegally caught eels to sell them for half the money, especially because the value of eels, the price per pound is averaging, has been fluctuating between 500 and 800 pounds versus the $2,000 a pound last year. So that becomes a very good deterrent just in itself, because the individuals don't want to lose the money. That it was easy last year to say, yeah, I'll take your eels and mix them with mine, because they didn't have to worry about reaching their quota too early. But now they have to worry about reaching their quota, and as soon as we instituted that quota, fishermen were instantly saying, okay, I get 20 pounds, this is what the value is. They were calculating in their mind very quickly of what they could make in that year. And anything that takes money away from them is something they don't really look very highly at. So,
Thanks. We got Doug and then Richie.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a neighboring state, that last year we put in a tremendous amount of effort in law enforcement, and I think we ended up with 22 cases in our little 13 miles of coastline, and also had an assaulted officer. And compare that to this year, we've had nothing, even though we've had just as much effort out there, 2 or 3, sometimes 4 officers out every night checking there. So obviously, I'm sure some of this action that's been taken by Maine has helped us out. Maybe the price too, because the price isn't quite as high as it was last year. It's less than half of what it was last year. But I still would like to commend the state of Maine for taking these efforts, and but also say that we're still putting a lot of effort on enforcement here for a very small amount of species.
Thanks, Doug. I got Richie and then Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Pat. Just follow up on what Sarah was getting into. Is there tracking beyond the first dealer into the export system? So what I'm thinking is, could someone sell to the secondary dealer that you're talking about, that's the exporter, and bypass your record-keeping system?
No, because they have to keep a running tally on the truck, and because that running tally must be maintained with the dealers themselves when they get to their fixed facility. I think the chain of custody in monitoring of those landings from harvester to supplemental to dealer is very, very strong. Now, once they leave the state, then it falls over to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for their monitoring of what's being exported. And I know the Colonel's had many conversations with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in dealing with that side of the monitoring. There may be loopholes, but I think we've tied it up in our end as best we can.
Thanks. I got Bob and then Mitch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Pat, for your excellent report. A question to you, Pat. Actually, I have two. The first is, how have you covered what must be enormous administrative costs associated with developing and implementing this program?
We established some funds over the past 2 years, which were very beneficial for Elver and eel management and enforcement. So we were actually able to cover all the costs associated with the swipe card system in particular. But the swipe card system itself, the overall budget was not astronomical. I think with all of the equipment we purchased, and swipe cards and some staff training, totaled around $75,000. Now that we have that in place, we're already getting ready to transfer that technology over to our urchin fishery and our scallop fishery, and if that works, and the governor's reelected and I have a job next year, my goal is to transfer it to all other fisheries.
Thank you. And I have a second question. Thank you. Do you collect information on the locations of the harvests? Is that part of the system?
So the swipe card, even though the harvester maintains the swipe card itself, it's really for the dealer reporting. We still require the monthly harvester reporting where we get the information as far as harvest location. It's fairly rough information right now. The one thing that we have invested heavily in and has been very expensive is a new business management system for enforcement, for licensing, and for harvester reporting and dealer reporting. We're hoping that within the next 2 years we're going to have a system that will tie together with the swipe cards, and we'll be able to do both harvester and dealer reporting at the time of sale, so we can easily add that type of information into it. So we've this is where, Bob, we have invested heavily, and it's been very expensive. I think we've invested around $400,000 to date in that system, but we still have a couple years of work to do.
Thank you. Mitch?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was going to address the questions asked by the Massachusetts delegates about traceability beyond the first dealer, and Pat has addressed most of those points. I just want to, first of all, I want to commend Pat and the state of Maine and everyone at DMR for all the great work they've done. I think that Pat's being a little bit modest about just how successful this program has been. I think it's been well received by dealers. It's been accepted by the fishermen, and it has clearly changed the entire characteristic of the fishery as we move from one that is operated as a cash business with a lot of non-reporting to one that's much more professionalized and enforceable. I just want to point out, in relation to that very question about the traceability, obviously our federal partners in the Fish and Wildlife Service are playing a critical role in helping to improve the fishery. It was interesting to read through the law enforcement comments from prior to Addendum 4, where it was suggested that the magnitude of the problem was such that perhaps the federal resources were not sufficient, or state resources were not sufficient to keep up with the poaching efforts. But I think this year has demonstrated that a dedicated effort by jurisdictions working together really is capable of taking, putting a fishery under control that was perceived to be out of control in the past. I want to just conclude by saying I really hope that the Fish and Wildlife Service will continue to focus on this particular question of the export process. Basically, Maine has authority to regulate what a dealer does in the state buying those fish, but as we've now heard, that dealer can turn around to another dealer the very next day, someone who's not licensed, someone who's not even from Maine, and can sell those eels to anyone they want. And presumably, those individuals would be subject to the same Fish and Wildlife Service reporting requirements, which includes 48 hours advance notice of all shipments. It requires that the shipments go out of a particular airport. But if a dealer is not, quote-unquote, on the radar screen, working in a state other than Maine where the local fish and wildlife officers might not even know there is a glass eel trade going on, and if they're taking the eels to an airport other than the major airports where Fish and Wildlife has a consistent presence to check exports, a dealer can presumably go to another airport where there's just no one even present that is aware of these issues. So it's been a really great amount of progress in 1 year, but in terms of the issue of sure to plain traceability, we still have some work to do, and I look forward to sharing thoughts further with the state as well as with the Fish and Wildlife Service so that we can continue to tighten up and improve the fishery. Thank you.
Thanks. Joe would like to provide a response to some of that input.
Yeah, the Commission did a great job summarizing our effort up there, and truly the offices and the whole department's a joint effort pulling this off, and it has been very effective. I'm very pleased in how it went. One of the things, and Pat mentioned this kind of quickly, but I want to bring attention to it because a lot of my my peers in law enforcement have confidentiality issues with landing reports. Maine, up until last year, we weren't able to look at our landing records unless we had a good reason, probable cause a violation had been committed. The commissioner, through working with the legislature, got authority for a patrol to look at landing records, and it was absolutely, to me, incredible. And I've been around for almost 40 years doing this, and last year was the first time I had the opportunity to look at landing records and compare dealer records with harvester records. And the discrepancies that were there within the Alva fishery were significant, which allowed us to, on one of the slides, we ended up moving forward with suspensions of 14 harvesters. They had a minimum of 25 pounds difference in Alva's reported minimum. Some of them were 100-pound differences between harvester and dealer landing. So, you may go back to your respective states and just consider giving some of that information up to law enforcement. It is confidential to us. We don't use that information unless we make a case, and obviously if it goes to court, that information is made public during the trial. But certainly it really enhanced our enforceability of these laws, and it's a heck of a resource for law enforcement, especially when you go from not having that information then all of a sudden having this treasure load of info. We actually hired an investigator last year at the beginning of the season. We're on year 2 with him right now, and he was able to look at records and spend a lot of time bringing to my attention and the other leadership's attention the records that were incomplete or inaccurate that made a huge difference. And I think in the end of the day, I think our data, fisheries data from Maine, harvester data, will be improved across fisheries, not just Alva fishing, but all fisheries, as a result of law enforcement have access to landing data. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joe. It was great. You got Jim and then Dan.
Thanks, Chairman. And just to echo Mitch's comments, I think, Pat, you and the state of Maine should be commended. I think this is a great program. And the question I really have is looking at the future, because this obviously has applicability to other fisheries. We're in the process of modernizing our permitting system and tracking, because we've had a lot of interesting things going on in New York. You mentioned, you already answered one question. This was, you've invested $400,000 in this. Just the immediate question is that just the infrastructure? Is that all the staffing, whatever? And at some point, you probably don't have the numbers now, but if you could, come up with what this program's costing you to implement, and then what you think the operational cost would be a help for us as we're going into similar type things and modernizing our tracking. Thanks.
Go ahead, Pat.
Thanks, Jim. I don't want to confuse the $400,000 number that I'm talking about is a second. Well, it's our major program within the agency to modernize and implement a system across the 3 major areas for enforcement, licensing, and landings. We call it the main lead system. Associated with that is the swipe card system. That was a separate budget of $75,000, but we're hoping we're going to be able to merge these two. But I'll be happy to share that information.
All right, thanks a lot. Dan?
Thank you. Pat, how many or how frequently are fishermen observed in the field, either in the act of harvest or just possessing them before dealers? And my follow-up question is, did you consider creating a logbook, like a VTR, so that the harvester writes something down that is somewhat permanent, and then if is observed by an officer, and then if some of those eels disappear, you'll be able to know where to go to investigate?
So we did consider a few different types of tracking requirements. Well, let me back up first. We've got 52 Marine Patrol officers in the state of Maine. You take off the top command staff, and we've got about 30 individuals who are very active in enforcing the fishery on the ground before eels are brought to the dealers. So that has always been the primary focus for Marine Patrol officers. In the last year, the Colonel has shifted some of that priority, not all of it, but some of it, back onto the supplemental dealers, because last year we were having having a lot of problems with the supplemental dealers. So we are spending more time actually going to the supplemental dealers, weighing up their product to ensure that we have consistency and accuracy for what they're bringing into the field. And to date, there's only been I believe two warnings, Colonel, written to supplemental buyers. We have recently suspended one dealer, but that was for a reporting violation, not an accuracy violation. So that's been the focus of Marine Patrol. The work on the water, we have talked about having some sort of a record, some sort of a logbook. In fact, Mitch brought it up through his business about almost like the VTR would be a good example, or even almost like what a truck driver would have. We didn't implement that. There were some challenges in doing that, but it's something that we're continuing to look at to try to make sure that we've got a better record of what the harvesters are catching. Now, all of that said, though, from when that harvester leaves that dealer, they have a receipt printed out, and that dealer has a receipt printed out. So we can go back to a dealer if they have a discrepancy in their landings, and they come to us and say, well, that's not correct. We can go back to those dealers, and we can look at what they purchased right from the lab in Booth Bay and print out those receipts from our office now to be able to track it. So it gives some accountability to the harvester to say, I need to follow, and I need to look at what I'm landing and to make sure I'm tracking it. Because as I said, I mean, if they don't track it, they lose their license, and now they're paying back. So more work to do there, but I think we've made a lot of strides forward.
All right, thanks. I got two more people, Rick and Dennis. I just want to point out that, and we started a few minutes early. We are right up to where we should be, starting early. So obviously, this effort by Maine is of interest to a lot of us as we struggle with these reporting issues back home, and I'm sure that Maine would be happy to share and discuss with us after the meeting as well. So see if we can try to wrap these couple comments up so we can move forward. We got Rick and then Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief. I'm going to turn my hat a little from a commission hat to an ACCSP hat and just remind the commissioners that the ACCSP is funding a swipe card program starting in October this year. And if anyone's interested, it might be worth a question for the coordinating council on Thursday.
Great. Thanks, Rick. And then Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like others, I compliment the state of Maine for what they've done. I think they've done an admirable job, and I don't say that to the state of Maine a whole lot in the past.
Somebody write that down.
No, you've done a wonderful job, Pat. Do you foresee any problems in the future with dealing with latency? Will there be any latency, and will you be renewing permits for people who don't have a catch, or have you considered where you would go in that area?
So just quickly, I think with the prices, what it is, the idea of latency, probably it won't exist. But what was taken off the books was the lottery system. So if somebody does not renew their license, that license goes away. If they miss 1 year, they're done. And then if an individual is suspended permanently, and their privilege has been permanently revoked, they're also done. So we don't have anything in place at this time to allow people to come back and re-enter the fishery. It's a question that was discussed, but there was no movement at the legislature. So.
All right. Thanks. Go ahead, Walter.
Yeah, obviously re-entry into a limited fishery is I think it's something we all struggle with, and that's something we have to figure out is what to do if somebody gives up their license or if they're revoked, what to do with that quota. Right now, it would just go back into the pool and just be redistributed amongst all fishermen. So we're going to have to figure out a way to allow for some entry at some point, because a good number of Elver fishermen are older than I am. Thank you.
Go ahead, Pat.
I'll be very, very quick. There's been a lot of talk about what Maine did and Maine DMR has done, but I'd be remiss if I didn't make a statement that this was a work of cooperation between the executive branch, my department, and the legislative branch, which is Representative Kamiga's committee, which he is the House Chair of. And if it was not for Representative Kamiga, we would not be here today. So I want to just give kudos where kudos are due to Representative Kamiga.
Well, great job, definitely. All right, go ahead, Lance.
Yeah, just a comment that's amazing to see it done so rapidly and so thoroughly as far as the quantification of distribution. I was wondering if the technical committee or within Maine, you're giving any mapping or distributional attention to this, to what could be scientifically important to certain streams along the coast, timing as well as headwaters, this sort of migrational information.
So I can't say whether my staff has shared it with the technical committee. I know there's been some information brought forward, but I think, Lance, that one of the areas we need better focus on is a little bit better detail from our harvester reporting. So we have we've got a really good idea regionally where the yields are coming from, but I think, and you and I have had these conversations before, really get down to the river-specific location, because as we know, there's some river systems have a much higher value than others, and I think that's some of the conversation I'm having with staff about how to pinpoint that.
All right, thanks a lot. Looks like that's got through that agenda item. Really good discussion. Great work in Maine's part and others that helped with that. We're going to move on to agenda item 5, which is a technical committee report from Sheila Eiler. At the October meeting, the board directed the TC and stock assessment subcommittee to update some of the key indices from the last assessment, as well as update landings data through 2013, just to manage any grumbling stomachs as we are working through our lunch period. We're hopeful that we'll get through the technical committee report, and ideally what we'd like to do is get through the draft addendum and then allow us to have that information to digest over lunch. But we'll see how we go. Try to break it no later than 1 o'clock, all right? Hopefully sooner than that. Is that okay with everybody? Any objection? All right. Go ahead, Sheila.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully I can keep this short. I'm going to move the next one. So the technical committee was tasked to update some indices that included for us the harvest data. I'm going to back up one. Oh, there was another one. Sorry. It's okay. We were asked to update some indices, include the harvest data and the Young of the Year survey. And those data were updated through 2013. We were not able to update any other indices that were used in the stock assessment besides those two. We also developed a life cycle survey, or at least a framework for a life cycle survey, and I can give you some of the details for that. It's still in a draft form. The technical committee has not released that yet, but we do have some information we can pass along to the board. And also we discussed the idea of scientific collection permits and kind of the threshold that should be considered for board action versus the amount of a collection permit that could be handled at a state level. This is last year's. Or last meeting's. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. All right, so the presentation was from the February meeting. But I will update you with the harvest data for 2013. The harvest data that we received from all states through 2013, what we saw was an increase. Well, the stock assessment period ended in 2010, and so we looked at 2011 through 2013 harvest data. 2011 showed the highest harvest landings since the stock assessment period began in 1998. Harvest levels dropped somewhat in 2012, and the levels again dropped in 2013. But the 2013 data, we're missing North Carolina's reporting yet for 2013, so that number might go up. But the 2013 level right now is in line with those the average data from the stock assessment years. I'm still out of luck. All right. We don't have anything to look at, but that's okay. With the Young of the Year survey, we completed the data through 2013, and you should have received some information in your briefing materials about the Young of the Year survey updates that we had done. What we found was that there was no significant trends in any of the Young of the Year indices. except for Goose Creek in South Carolina, which showed a decline in the indices. And we just want to point out that the Young of the Year surveys are highly variable. So some states did see increases in Young of the Year numbers in the last couple of years. Some states saw a decline, and a lot of states saw the average number. So either regional or short-term changes in the Young of the Year indice does not indicate that there's an increasing trend or an increasing population for American eels. We just want you to take that into consideration. And because we only looked at the Young of the Year survey and the harvest data, we did not do a comprehensive review of all the indices for the stock assessment. The technical committee does not recommend any changes to the status of the stock, which remains depleted from the results from the 2012 assessment. And at this time, the technical committee continues to recommend that harvest be reduced at all life stages. You're getting there now? All right. So moving on to the life cycle survey, we were tasked to develop a survey to look at the potential for transferability between life stages, and we thought that having a life cycle survey may be a way to address that. So the technical committee developed a framework for sampling and methodology to conduct life cycle surveys. And those surveys consider both geographic, region, and watershed size. So there was some interest in looking at smaller watersheds versus larger watersheds and how mortality might be different between those different size watersheds. At this time, the technical committee does not have enough information to determine natural mortality rates or a transferability between life stages, which was a request by the board. If we could determine if there's a transfer from yellow eel to glass eel, we just aren't able to do that at this time, but the life cycle survey should help us get closer to that answer. And just a few more details about the survey. It's broken into 4 regions along the coast, and what we'd like to see is that 3 watershed sizes per region get sampled, so that would be a total of 12 life cycle surveys along the coast. And the life cycle survey would include glass eel sampling, yellow eel sampling, and silver eel sampling. And we have provided a memorandum. In the memorandum from the technical committee, there is some information on the life cycle surveys and the costs associated with those. Some states would be required to do a full life cycle survey, and there's more states than surveys that would be required. So the states that aren't implementing a full life cycle survey, we would recommend that they at least do a partial life cycle survey, so looking at glass eel to yellow eel or yellow eel to silver eel within their jurisdiction. And to complete the life cycle surveys, technical committee staff would like more research done on OTC marking, its otolith marking. That would be a way to mark the glass eels to do population assessments. And we'd also need additional training on aging, as aging would be a very important component in doing the yellow eel and the silver eel surveys to get population assessments. And the final topic we discussed was scientific collection permits. The Management and Science Committee had discussed scientific collection permits, and they had recommended that 1% of a harvest from a state be assigned to scientific collection permits as a maximum. And the technical committee recommended that that should be changed slightly, so it's 1% of an individual state's landings be assigned to a scientific collection permit for eel. But we also recommend that no new fisheries for eels occur, so in a state where there is only a yellow eel fishery, we do not recommend to have a scientific collection permit for glass eels. Understanding that developing aquaculture is difficult without having access to glass eels because there's not propagation of eels in aquaculture facilities at this time, that we felt there should be a separate permitting system for aquaculture needs, especially from a commercial standpoint. And if a quota system is developed for glass eels in the U.S., we suggest that the board set aside some part of that quota to be used for aquaculture. And that would be annually renewable, unlike the scientific collection permits, which are usually definitive in the time that they're implemented. And we suggest that the aquaculture permits could be used by any jurisdiction on the board, but they would require approval by the board. So we'd like the board to make the decision on who gets the quota for the aquaculture permits. So that summarizes the information that we had from the technical committee. At this time, we could take questions, I guess.
Any questions? Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just noticed in the handout the Young of the Year update analysis, the charts. some are up, some are down, some are flat. It's like there's no real indication that anything's changing. I mean, we have some places it's getting better, some places it's getting worse, some places. And is that pretty much what you're finding?
Yes, the technical committee found no trend with the Young of Year survey in the past 3 years in comparison to the stock assessment time period, so we don't want to make any changes to the stock assessment of the population.
Thanks. I got Rob and then Richie.
I'm interested in the same as Bill from a different reason. Time keeps rolling on, and Virginia's expended about $350,000 over time with the Young Year survey, and I'm just wondering, not so much when is it enough, but I'm wondering what mechanisms can be made available to utilize those surveys rather than hearing, as I have for the 5th meeting now, that there's really nothing linked from the Young of the Year further up. And I saw the part in the life stage to look at the incremental change, I guess, from glass eel up to yellow eel, which seems, that's right now that's wishful, and that's okay. I mean, you have to start somewhere. But maybe there's something here on the scientific collection permits. In Virginia, of course, the way we stand, and we talked about this last time, it's no commercial venture whatsoever. However, perhaps there could be a thinking of this life stage getting a little more attention where, similar to the good points of the RSA that are promoted by the council, you could have a situation where an institution, an academic institution, wished to pursue the life stage, and part of the sale of the eels went towards that type of funding. Has something like that been talked about yet by the technical committee? So, I think that's the advance forward. That may give us an idea about not only the life stage of certain areas, but it also may help bridge this gap where we're collecting now for about the 15th year a Young of Year survey, and what we hear is the trends aren't there, and I've been hearing that for a while. So the main question is about the life stage, and is it possible these scientific collection permits can somehow, instead of commercial sale, be pushed back into academic investigation?
So on the first point with the variability of the Young of the Year surveys, I think that they've been doing long-term surveys, particularly in Europe, with Young of the Year eels, and they found that even though it's variable on an annual basis, over a long-term period, they're able to get some meaningful results. And Kate says in Europe, they've been doing those surveys since the 1950s. They have a significant time period of information there. So the hope is that with additional information, we'll be able to see some trends at some point. We had a part of the addendum that include a research set-aside, which might address selling eels to get funding to do additional research. And that right now is not in the addendum, but it is something that we did consider and potentially could be added back into the addendum.
Thanks. I got Richie, then Terry, John, and Mitch. Go ahead, Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we adopt a coast-wide quota, I think you're saying that the technical committee would still be opposed to any new fisheries. And I guess I need to understand why that decision is not a policy decision, in that new fisheries would not add any additional mortality. It would just determine who would be inflicting the mortality.
The technical committee had discussed and has suggested no new fisheries continuously since the development of the benchmark assessment. The addendum would allow for the development of new fisheries provided that it is offset by decreases in mortality or increases in conservation and habitat enhancement in other areas. So there is an overall net benefit to the population, which I will discuss in the next agenda item.
So you're saying that if we adopt a coast-wide quota, then that quota could be prosecuted by different states and not just the 2 states that now have it?
I think one thing the technical committee did point out is that we don't understand the habitat benefits of the differences in habitat between jurisdictions. So there may be more of a benefit of having a fishery for glass eels, for instance, in one place instead of another, if they're more successful in establishing themselves, say, in the Hudson River versus some of the small rivers in Maine. And because we don't understand that relationship, we don't encourage a new fishery for that reason.
All right, got Terry and then John.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question concerns the aquaculture permit and whether or not the TC considered any other alternatives other than taking a quota off the top of a coast-wide limit.
We felt like for the aquaculture permit to work, it had to be part of a quota system. Toward the end of the addendum, there's sustainability permits that could potentially add glass eel harvest along the coast and add to the glass eel quota, which might offset some of the impacts it would have on the current states that have a glass eel fishery. But otherwise, we felt that it was adding a new fishery to the system.
Thanks. I'll rest my comments for later in the afternoon.
All right, thanks, Terry. John and then Mitch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the report, Sheila. I was just curious, as kind of a follow-up on Rob's question about the glass eel survey. One of the most striking things about the yellow eel landings has been the huge increase in Maryland's yellow eel landings since about 2010. And I noticed that the Chesapeake and the Delaware Mid-Atlantic Young of the Year surveys both had high levels in around 2006, 2007. I was just wondering if the TC looked at any linkages between the glass eel indices and the yellow eel landings.
I don't think that we've looked at that specifically at this time. Obviously, there's likely a linkage, but we don't have good information on harvest versus effort data, so it's hard for us to assess that at this time.
Okay. Mitch and then Lewis and Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first point is relating to the Young of the Year surveys and Commissioner O'Reilly's questions about, what's the value of the surveys when we hear time after time that there's no trend. I would refer my fellow commissioners to the fact that in the 2007 Fish and Wildlife decision not to list the eel as endangered, the authors pointed out that the lack of a downward trend in those recruitment surveys was a very important indicator of the reproductive capacity of the overall species. Similarly, in the ASMFC benchmark assessment that was released that year, the Stock Assessment Subcommittee had decided not to include Young of the Year indices for precisely the reason that there were no trends indicated. But in the peer review process, that stock assessment was rejected, and one of the grounds for the rejection was the fact that it did not include those Young of the Year surveys. The lack of a trend in the Young of the Year surveys is just as meaningful in indicating that the species is not in collapse as it might be indicating that the species is not on the rise. In summarizing the results of the assessment, this 3-year assessment that the technical committee made, Sheila was quick to point out that she wants everyone to understand that this does not mean that recruitment is on the rise, a few years, but it could just as well be said that the statistics and these trends, these indices are also indicating that the fishery is not in the decline. So I just wanted to suggest that those Young of the Year surveys are very important, but I think it's wonderful to see that the technical committee is actually endorsing to move in a more thorough direction, which is to do actual life cycle surveys. And I remember it was Wilson Laney at either the last meeting or 2 meetings ago made the very smart suggestion that we don't necessarily need to do a Young of the Year survey in every state. It might be more effective to do good regional life cycle surveys. We can get a lot more bang for our buck. And I think that from what I'm hearing, the TC has really picked up on that concept. So hopefully in the future we can see that we can tailor our young of the year surveys to those that are effective and those that we can then link to other life cycle surveys so we can get a better understanding of the relationship between the different life cycles. My second point will be brief. I'm just wondering, and it's not a point, it's actually a question for you, Sheila. In terms of this aquaculture allocation, you said very deliberately that the decisions as to whether to allocate glacial quota for aquaculture would be made at the board level and not at the state level. And I'm wondering, like, where does that line draw? Would it be the board's position that we as commissioners would be hearing applications for aquaculture permits from individuals regardless of what state they're from? Or would that decision actually be passed down to the state level? It's a question, but obviously it's a little bit of a loaded question. It seems to me that if this commission were to be put in a position of choosing winners and losers between various aquaculture applicants from within one state or from multiple states, would be a very challenging road for us to go on. And I would suggest to my fellow commissioners that we should be very weary of that. I understand that there's a lot of states and a lot of individuals from the various states that want to pursue aquaculture and want to get glacial quota in order to do that. And I look forward to participating in those discussions going forward, but hopefully a lot of those discussions will be passed to the state level, because it really, once this commission tells a state what is an appropriate harvest level for a particular state, once we get beyond that point, I think it would be very it could become a little bit controversial to think that a bunch of commissioners in D.C. would then make the next decisions as to winners and losers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mitch. Louis, and then Pat.
Well, I don't have a motion this meeting, so that's a good thing. The issue still remains a pretty hot topic in North Carolina, however. The interest in trying to generate some level of glacial harvest to try these aquaculture ventures. I just don't get the sense from the technical committee discussions that there's really any interest at the technical committee of pursuing that. It's kind of like there's no thinking outside the box, as I've been able to see, to try to figure out a way to make it happen. And that kind of confounds me a little bit because of the potential that we know from other jurisdictions, particularly Europeans, where it does have a great potential to help us in terms of restocking and reintroducing eels if we were to have a problem. But I think the level of certainty in the stock assessment for eels is pretty low, from my understanding. And I think as we move forward with this document, and we don't need to get into it today because it could last till this afternoon, but I think before we may have final approval on this document, and certainly as we go out to the public, I think we need to try to think a little more outside the box in terms of how we might make something like this happen. There's no doubt in my mind that we can't come up with some kind of conversion rate from yellow eels to glass eels to try to provide some opportunity for these brick and mortar facilities. I've talked with Mitch on several occasions. I know that there may be a long line of folks that would be interested in participating. I just don't know. But kind of like the eel issue in Maine that we just talked about, the swipe card system and the limited entry, you get what you get in a coast-wide allocation scheme, and if that's not enough, sorry. But at the same point, providing some of those opportunities while at the same time not greatly disadvantaging our yellow and silver eel fisheries is an important direction that I'm going to be looking for at the ultimate end of this addendum.
Okay, thanks, Louis. Pat, good to see you back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad to be back for at least this go-round. I listened to what Dr. Daniels said, and I listened to what Mitch had to say, and then referring back to the status of the yellow stock itself, or the glass eel stock itself, when we talk about trends, there must be some kind of trend. I look at the number of glass eels, the poundage of glass eel that's gone up in the last couple of years, 2012 and 2013, from about 8,000 or 9,000 in 2011 up to 20,000, 18,000. Yet, the report, unless I misunderstood it, the report showed that the surveys for 2013 didn't show any change in quantity of glass seals out there. So is it likely that we're missing them? We're not in the places where they're arriving and showing up. When you look at the incidental enforcement activities, I'll call them incidental because several people have gotten caught recently, we're finding several pounds, many pounds of illegal glass seals being taken. We look at what we're doing with this addendum, we're going to wipe out, supposedly if we go forward, a glass seal fishery that takes 15 or 20,000 pounds versus the hundreds of thousands of pounds of glass seals that are being killed. So the real question is, are we really trying to curtail the harvest of glass seals? Are we really trying to bring them back? Because when you put up there a possible recommendation for aquaculture permit, and then possibly suggest that it's a board issue, not a state issue, I think we missed the point completely. To Dr. Daniel's point, when the group came in and made the presentation 2 years ago and then came back again last year, and the thought of taking roughly 750 pounds every year to go out and turn them over to a profit for an enterprise without any indication as to how many of those are going to be put back into the wild, it just seems to me from this particular point of view that line item should be taken completely out and not even be considered. Relative to whether it should be a state issue or a board issue, there's no question. If you have an existing fishery, whether it turns out to be menhaden, it turns out to be eels or what, it appears that if the state has control as to how they dole out their shares, whether it's recreational or commercial, it would be incumbent upon them to do what they would with it. We have conservation equivalency in literally every single species of fish that we're dealing with. So to put it back on the board or put it up there as a possibility for the board to make the decision that they will dole out or make available any poundage for agriculture or whatever, I think it's not in the best interest of what we're trying to accomplish. Relative to giving away other states' quotas, that's a tough one. I think the way you do that is once you've prosecuted the fishery, as Florida and North Carolina and others have been very kind to New York with all our overages and bluefish and in menhaden, I think that's the way it works. So I would assume if you wanted to have an elver fishery, a glass eel fishery and an aquaculture, maybe you should go to our friend across the way there and ask if they would donate 750 pounds of their glass eels to the aquaculture industry. That's a little ludicrous for an example, but that's what we're looking at. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is very subjective. It's not objective at all, the way we're going. We have to remain as objective in this as we can. So thanks for welcoming me back, and I hope I'm not too talkative, but I'm not going to let you off the hook, and I'm going to keep babbling. Thank you.
All right, Pat. We're going to have a job for you later on in the agenda, something you specialize in. Yeah, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheila, I'm looking at the Young of the Year update analysis, the handout. I noticed that the scales are very, very different, both comparing relative abundance indexes on with regard to the various sites, as well the numbers caught with regard to the regions. Can you just quickly summarize in lay terms how we're supposed to look at these and understand those differences in scale? Thank you.
Right, so in the numbers caught, there's a summary section for each region. So, for example, the Gulf of Maine's on the first page. Those were the summary data that were used in the stock assessment. We were not able to summarize the data on a regional level for this reanalysis. We did that per site, and those are the smaller graphs that you see on the top of the page. And when they do the summary, they still look at all the individual surveys and the index there of how much they have changed from one year to the next, and that gets rolled into this generalized survey.
So if I could quickly follow up. So, for example, comparing southern New England and Delaware and Mid-Atlantic Coastal Bay, I see that numbers caught is in the hundreds for southern New England. It's in the single digits for Delaware and Mid-Atlantic. Can you just speak to how, are those comparable, those two?
What we're looking at is a change in index. So it's based on the sample location. Some sample locations catch large numbers of glass eels just by where they're located, other locations do not. So we're just really looking at the change from one year to the next, but not the actual numbers that are harvested.
Any other questions for Sheila? Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheila, it's my understanding that eels originate in the Sargasso Sea, and from that point they get into the ocean, or they're in the ocean, and they move up the coast randomly and just land in particular rivers just by the way things are at the moment. So what value is young of the year when it can be so variable, where glass eels can arrive in Delaware in greater abundance and in New Hampshire at lesser abundance? I look at the first page of the young of the year, and I look at the Lamprey River in the upper right-hand corner, which is the place where they go up over the eel and where people catch them, is just essentially down the street from me. And I look at the relative abundance, and it took really a good hike, which to me there's no logical scientific reason for that other than randomness. So all of this, looking at this, really doesn't mean a whole lot to me.
I think inherently with the eels biology, you're going to have randomness on the coast. Another thing to keep in mind is that with recruitment, it's going to take several years to see increased recruitment if we are protecting eels that are out migrating, just because of the time it takes for an eel to mature, and that also changes up and down the coast. So the maturity stage or rate in the southern states is a shorter amount of time than in the northern part of the states. So I think that leads to some variability. But sheer ocean transport is an issue here, and so we really need to look at things from a coast-wide level, and even more so than a regional level when we're looking at the young of the year surveys.
Send this? Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, still for Mr. Abbott there, just to let him know that we used to fish glass eels. We used to fish glass eels in Puerto Rico. And the minute they turned on the sugarcane factories, the glass eels were gone. The minute the sugarcane factories were closed down, the glass eels came back within the next 2 or 3 days. It's all got to do with water quality. They're very sensitive to water quality. So that's the reason why probably in Maine you have an excellent amount of glass eels, whereas further south, Lake Okeechobee, for instance, the glass eels are very minimal because there's so much outflow of sewage and everything else that goes with it. The same in North Carolina. Just give you that.
Thanks, Marty. Got Lewis?
Yeah, just related to Dennis's point, which I think is astute. We just asked the question, the level in which these glass eel samples are standardized, and just thinking about the potential areas where various states might set their weirs or their dip nets or however they may be catching them. Is there some way to standardize the volume of water filtered and make those comparisons, or is it just we caught eels and we caught 100 in an hour, and there might be very different gear types? Has that been standardized in the eel, or is that documented in the plan?
So the methods for collection have been standardized, locations have been standardized, and if those need to be changed for a future assessment, we could do that.
Yeah, I was just curious. If I didn't remember when we were doing it, if there was a specific way we were supposed to do it, and so that they were comparable from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, the actual densities of eels that we're reporting. So they are comparable.
The collection methods and processing methods have been standardized. Mm-hmm.
All right, any other questions for Sheila? All right, being that we're 5-1, what I suggest we do, unless somebody objects, is that we break for lunch. We reconvene at 2 o'clock. We got a lot of work to do. We lost a little bit of time, but if everybody gets a good filling of lunch And now remember, I'm still considered a rookie here, I think, at ASMFC, but I have a high percentage of ending meetings on time, so I'm going to be cheering you guys along to try to get us through this still. All right, so we'll reconvene at 2 o'clock.